where Professor Graham Medley of the Scientific Pandemic Influencer Group on Modelling, SPI-M, as they're known, the group that, behind the whole modelling for we're all going to die if we don't lock down numbers, he actually admitted that modelling cannot accurately predict the numbers. He is the chairman of the task force in charge of modelling that has been advising the government on, what might happen if we do or don't lock down. Jamie Jenkins, it's absolutely extraordinary that the chairman of the body that has basically, to all intents and purposes, with their advice, pushed us into lockdowns for so many months of the last couple of years, now admits, we can't accurately predict the numbers, but hey-ho. I mean, this is extraordinary.
No, Julia, good morning. It is extraordinary, I think. You say, obviously saying some of the modelling is pretty much useless. I would probably go as far as to say is that the teams behind them are pretty much useless. And it's not just those who have been working for SAGE doing kind of the English modelling. I was looking yesterday just to track the actual modelling that kind of pushed Mark Drakeford in Wales into doing more things as well. And that's pretty much been useless. And I think if you start looking across the world, Julia, at some of the other models, I think Denmark have been lauded of having better modelling there. And I think the comments yesterday, Julia, is that we can't accurately predict behaviour change. Well, the first lockdown that we had back in March, which again, the modelling was way out on in terms of that. I think you've had 2 years worth of data now to predict exactly what kind of behavioural change would do. So to put together a model that doesn't factor in what the public might do in terms of behaviour change, it's just kind of incompetent.
Well, indeed, I mean, again, we know from the data, we know from, you can model this stuff just even from, people's, from Google Maps and things like that, what people were doing. And a week before the first lockdown in March 2020, I was already locked down, I already had COVID at that point. But, people were stopping going out. You didn't need to close the pubs and restaurants. No one was going to them anyway. People weren't seeing elderly relatives. I was certainly avoiding seeing relatives when I was out and about at work every day, and still mingling with people. And this is the thing. People know what to do. And they did it again at Christmas last year and the year before. We know that's what they do. But this is the extraordinary thing. Even the modelling that was looking at us coming out of lockdown 3, the one that lasted from early January 2021 right through to July last year, that they didn't even model things like half-term and children being off school, the weather getting warmer, people being outdoors. They didn't model people going to the pub to watch, the football matches during the European Championships. I mean, I'm not entirely sure what assumptions these people are putting in. And if you're not going to model things that are known, how on earth do you help to think you're going to predict the unknown?
No, indeed. And when the local authorities, for example, and the governments will do population planning, they will factor in how many people are going to be in an area so that we need to build more hospitals or build more schools. They'll know where the house building's going on. So these are the things that exactly what you said, Julia, these things, you factor them in. It's the unknown stuff that's more difficult. I think they were also saying at the committee yesterday that everything they thought about Omicron was not good in early December. And that's kind of what fed into the model. And we knew what the South Africans were saying at the time. And I did a blog just before Christmas, Julia, looking at Neil Ferguson's prediction. Even the numbers, when you added them all up, we would have needed so many infections. It was just implausible that, even my 8-year-old son could have worked out that this is absolute nonsense.
And that's the thing, actually. There have been an awful lot of people just going, hold on a minute. You don't need to be, a professor at a top university to be able to, or an ONS statistician, as you formerly were, to be able to go, hold on a minute, those numbers don't add up. I mean, when you look at the predictions that we had, some of the scenarios that were modelled, and we know they were only looking at worst-case scenarios, they were estimated that up to 6,000 people a day could die, not be hospitalised, could die during the Omicron wave at the peak. Tens of thousands of daily hospitalisations, and basically overwhelming the health service. We needed to have a lockdown. As it was, deaths peaked at 306 on January the 21st. Now, we know the real number is actually about half that, because many of those people were incidentally testing positive for COVID, having been in hospital. They were going to die anyway of something else. And daily admissions to hospital never rose beyond 2,615. Now, and again, a lot of those incidentally COVID positive. Those numbers are so far out. And yet, if we had lockdown, if Boris Johnson had not been under pressure from the COVID recovery group of backbench MPs, the Mark Harpers, the Steve Bakers and others, if he hadn't faced that pressure and all those exposés about him having been partying in December 2020 when we were all in tier 4 and the like, if that hadn't happened, we would have locked down, we would have gone through it all again, and then we wouldn't have seen those 6,000 people a day dying. Of course we wouldn't have. And once again, we would have been told it was because of the lockdown that we didn't see those deaths. The incredible thing we've got now from the July reopening, the decision not to go further than Plan B, which is always utterly a waste of time anyway, at Christmas, is that we've now got the proof that the numbers don't rise as high as the modelers say, and they peak and they go down again without any extra measures. We have the absolute proof that we don't need these measures. Why are so many people still adamant that it's lockdowns that save lives?
Yeah, well, if you're looking at the data, as you say, one of the good things with Boris not going forward with further restrictions, and remember they did in Scotland and Wales have some additional things, is that we can now look at what was the impact of not doing them. And you're right that the deaths were nowhere near 6,000 a day. I think they were estimating around 2,890 was their central estimate. And the lower best case scenario kind of thing, Julia, was just under 2,000. So it was way below that. And it was the actual numbers on deaths with COVID mentioned on the death certificate was around 200, and it was slightly lower if you look at deaths specifically.
When they were just they were out by such a huge factor, their numbers were meaningless. Can I also ask you about the World Health Organization? There are moves by World Health Organization, and a number of countries appeared to be very keen on this as well, for any future pandemic planning. Now, we have World Health Organization advice and pandemic planning. Again, if we'd followed that, we would probably be in a much better state right now than we are. But for the World Health Organization to, under the treaty with which members sign up, to basically take over the world's pandemic handling in the event of another pandemic, and there will be another one. It's not an if, it is a when. That would supersede not just the national governments but the constitutions of nations to basically decide what policies should be in place in terms of the restrictions on our freedoms. This is incredibly sinister. It's bad enough when our own governments do it. The idea that a completely unaccountable body like the World Health Organization taking it over is even more terrifying and sinister, isn't it?
No, absolute madness, Julia. You think, the World Health Organization, as you say, it's not elected by people. We had the Brexit vote to bring back kind of more powers and control to the UK. I think one of the things that they were talking about in the treaty is, and I think that some of the things that are pretty useful, is that in terms of vaccination, rather than all the rich countries kind of start boosting, and we're doing the 4th dose for some people here, where some parts of the world haven't had any, some of those things, and signing up to those are pretty much sensible. But you can't really have the World Organization doing the world's health policy, because the situation in South America might be completely different to the situation in kind of China at the time.
But also these decisions need to be made by accountable governments. As we've seen, it's only because Boris Johnson, his government being accountable, we finally got those measures lifted. Thank you so much for joining us. Jamie Jenkins, former head of health analysis at the ONS. No, I'm not an expert on the data, but he is.